What's going on, everybody? My name's Matt. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Last week we had the Giggle, the final episode of the 60th anniversary specials, and we had the BiGeneration. Now, a lot of people are confused as to what actually happened with the BiGeneration. I've seen questions like, is Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor now a completely separate Doctor? Is David Tennant's Doctor still roaming the universe? And with Russell T Davis's comments that the BiGeneration happened throughout the Doctor's entire lives, which meant that previous Doctors who had died are no longer dead, what does that mean for the future of the show? I'm going to try and explain it as best I can and as best that I understand it to hopefully clean up some of the confusion. So going purely on the leak that happened, that I made a video on a couple of weeks ago about the BiGeneration, we can kind of infer what actually happened, because it doesn't actually explain it very well in the TV show, but the leak, I feel like, did explain it quite well. So the BiGeneration was essentially something that was never meant to happen. It was something that only exists in Gallifreyan myth. But because the Doctor had basically invoked a superstition at the edge of the universe that gave way to the Toymaker being able to enter our universe, which also meant other impossible things could happen, the BiGeneration being one of them. What actually happened with the BiGeneration, though? Because it is quite an interesting thing. From what I understand, Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor, who already existed in the future, because there's always a future version of the Doctor, he already existed somewhere in the timeline. But because the Toymaker essentially forced the Doctor to regenerate by shooting him with that laser, it triggered the BiGeneration, which pulled Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor backwards in time to the point where David Tennant regenerated, because he was never meant to regenerate at that point, which triggered the BiGeneration, because it's an event that wasn't supposed to happen. It's an impossible thing. So that triggered the BiGeneration, which meant Ncuti Gatwa, who existed in the future, was pulled backwards in time, and therefore had some sort of kind of like a meta crisis where he turned, where David Tennant essentially gave birth to Ncuti Gatwa, which meant his origin is now that point, although he existed in the future. Now, we know that Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor is a future version of the Doctor, because he even mentions it in the Giggle, in the episode. He's talking about rehab for Time Lords. We're doing it all out of order. He remembers what David Tennant remembers. He experienced what David Tennant is going to be experiencing moving forward, having lived with the noble family, travelling with them, and retiring, essentially, so he can sort himself out and let go of the past. That is all Ncuti Gatwa's past, but David Tennant's future. At the point of the BiGeneration, when Ncuti Gatwa was pulled backwards in time, he was able to tell this to David Tennant's Doctor. He was able to convince him to take the time that he needed, which kind of means that this was always meant to happen, even though it was an impossible event. So realistically, this is probably a fixed point event. Now, moving forward, there are essentially now multiple timelines of the Doctor, but realistically, there always have been. There is always a version of the first Doctor, William Hartnell, somewhere in the universe. There is always a version of the second Doctor in the universe. There is always a version of Christopher Eccleston, Sylvester McCoy. Any Doctor you can think of, there is a version of them in the universe somewhere, and we've seen it in the past where the Doctor has ran into his past self. So if we were following the Doctor's timeline chronologically, and let's say David Tennant was the most up-to-date version, we saw a future version of the Doctor appear, which was Ncuti Gatwa, who then told him to retire and take it easy and sort himself out. So from our perspective, David Tennant's Doctor, who is our current Doctor, is now living with Donna's family, and he will live for an undefined amount of time, which realistically means it opens the door for more David Tennant adventures in the future. And at some point he will regenerate. When he regenerates, he will become Ncuti Gatwa, and then he will be pulled back in time again, having remembered everything, so he can deliver the message to his past self in the events of the Giggle. Now, I'm not entirely sure what Russell T Davies was talking about when he said that the bigeneration happened across the Doctor's entire timeline, which meant other Doctors who had previously died were now alive. Does that mean that Sylvester McCoy is alive because he regenerated into Paul McGann for the 1996 movie? Does that mean that he was able to then carry on essentially during the events of the 1996 movie? Does that mean we could potentially see a Paul McGann series? Maybe a Sylvester McCoy series? Maybe a series with previous Doctors who had previously existed without it actually affecting the timeline? Does this mean that there are more timelines for the Doctor? That's the one thing I don't fully understand, but it'll be interesting to see if Russell T Davies or whoever showruns Doctor Who moving forward tackles this. Maybe they'll just not bother with it. Maybe they'll just decide not to pursue it. But it does open the door to basically rewrite the Doctor's history and have it actually make sense where it doesn't affect canon. Now, the Doctor's history has already been altered. We've seen it with the Timeless Child. We've seen it with the Toymaker having made that reference, saying that I made a jigsaw out of your life, which again opens up the possibility that at any point in the future they can retcon something and it actually makes sense, because we can just say, oh, actually that was something that the Toymaker did in the 60th anniversary special. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know, but it does make me feel a little bit better about the Timeless Child, because we know that essentially this is a fresh start for Doctor Who. This is going to be a clean slate starting at season 1 with Ncuti Gatwa. Those of us that really don't like the Timeless Child storyline, but then the ones that really do, we can essentially just ignore it because it both happened and didn't happen. And ultimately it probably won't matter moving forward. But who knows? I'd love to know what you think about this in the comment section down below. What do you think the future of Doctor Who is? And please don't go into the comment section shouting woke and it's going to be ruined because of political and gender politics and things like that, because I'm not interested in things like that. I'm interested purely in the canon of the show. What do you think is going to happen moving forward? Let me know. And whilst you're down there, if you are new to my YouTube channel, consider subscribing and pressing the bell notification. I do also have a join button so you become a channel member, and if you can leave a like and a comment to help out with the YouTube algorithm, I would really appreciate it. Until next time, see you later.